In today's special programme, we're analysing the fallout from the North Shropshire by-election, the 34% swing from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats, the third biggest in any by-election this century.
Well, let's get more with our guest Joseph Silke from Bright Blue, which describes itself as an independent think tank for liberal conservatism. Joseph, good to have you on the show. What will Conservative backbenchers, do you think, take away from this result as we kind of digest and dissect the win for the Liberal Democrats?
So it's clearly an absolute disaster. On the one hand, it's normal for incumbent governments to lose by-elections midterm, and the Liberal Democrats have historically been very good at winning those. But the scale of this defeat in a true blue territory that voted, I think, 60% to leave the European Union should be a big warning to the Prime Minister himself, but also the party. It's also that this was a completely unnecessary by-election. If Owen Paterson had just accepted his rightful punishment, he could be back in the Commons, yes, as a diminished figure, but still as an MP. Instead, Boris Johnson marched his troops up the hill to shoot themselves in the face and then marched them back down again. And now he's also lost the constituency to the Lib Dems. It's mind-boggling.
How much of this do you think was a vote against the Paterson affair and the allegations of corruption, etc., and how much of this is wider discontent with the way the government's running?
I'm not a party campaigner, but my understanding from people on the ground is that it was still winnable after the scandals with Owen Paterson. That on the ground, the response was okay, and they thought they would hold it. But Partygate completely blew that up. And it's had a significant impact. And it's not difficult to believe that the Prime Minister might have cost his party this election. And that's a big problem because Boris is a PM who people think is a winner. And he's proven that many times in the past. But if he starts to look like a loser, the party could easily start to look for a new leader. And I might say with very little sentimentality involved.
OK, little sentimentality. Well, 15%, though, of Tory MPs would need to put a letter in to the 1922 committee in order to force such a leadership election. What's your sense of how close we are then to those 54 MPs having to write to the 1922 committee?
I think as dissatisfied as some MPs might be, they would be hesitant to put in letters now because of the situation with the pandemic. I think it would look completely out of touch and self-indulgent if MPs triggered a leadership election when we're in the middle of a massive wave from Omicron. It's tended to be true that the Prime Minister is more popular with the Conservative members than MPs, although last month's Conservative home polling of members showed that he's even now in negative territory with them. I wouldn't, however, expect a leadership challenge, if there is one at all. I mean, he could bring it back, but if there were to be one, I wouldn't expect it until the spring when this wave of coronavirus has subsided.
COVID aside, the Prime Minister presumably still has a fair bit of, electoral. He's still got a bit of credit in the bank, hasn't he, from that massive win 2 years ago, that 80-seat majority. That must buy him a bit more time with MPs.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to oversell this. Boris Johnson can survive this period. Everybody in the party wants him to succeed. Nobody was blind to his flaws when they elected him to be a leader. And they can tolerate some degree of scandal as long as he can deliver. And he needs to crack on with delivering, principally levelling up. Unfortunately, the levelling up white paper has been delayed until the new year. But hopefully we'll see that soon. And there have been some issues with, for example, the scaling back of HS2. The danger for the Prime Minister is that he, when it comes to these left-behind areas, they feel that he hasn't actually delivered for them like he promised. And simultaneously, he sort of alienates the South. And so he's got to make sure that he does deliver for those left-behind areas, principally through levelling up, whilst also convincing those in the South that he's still on their side.
OK. And it does feel like a dangerous moment for the Prime Minister, not least because we're in a current situation now where it feels like a lockdown, but it isn't. Rishi Sunak has had to cut short his trip from California to come home a day early in order to talk to businesses. He did speak to them also when he was in the US. But there is an absolute clamour now for more support from business. What is your sense about how much support there's actually going to be, about the strength of that position, support for businesses during the pandemic now versus this real reluctance that seems to be emerging amongst Tory MPs against tax rises?
I think we'll have to see at least targeted support, particularly for the hospitality sector that's going to suffer really badly. A lot of sectors can continue to function, even if we have as big a wave as we're expecting. I think the problem for the Prime Minister in general is that he just needs to be able to stress test his political strategies. When it comes to the standards procedures, when it comes to Partygate, where there's all this denial and obfuscation, that's clearly made things worse. And he just needs people around him who can help guide him towards making decisions that will be politically palatable.
Do you think the party is ideologically rudderless now? We've got big tax rises coming down the line. We've got big spending increases coming down the line. This isn't traditional conservatism, is it?
Well, it depends what you mean by traditional conservatism. I mean, there have been big spending conservative governments in the past. People think of Hal Macmillan, for example. Obviously, it's against the Thatcherite consensus since the 1980s, and that's what put some people off. But there is a tradition of what Boris Johnson would call one nation conservatism, which does fit into this mould.
Okay, so what about the ideological split then also that seems to be emerging in terms of liberty, a lack of COVID restrictions, versus the health crisis, of course, that the Prime Minister again is dealing with. And that was the source of the big rebellion of 99 MPs, that we saw just a few days ago, that was perhaps also an issue playing out in the by-election results. So there's a big split here, isn't there?
I think the main split really is between the public and Conservative MPs. Actually, the public seems to be quite supportive of these public health measures. They see them as necessary. It's Conservative MPs rather than the government who seem to be more out of touch. Though I think you're right that I think it was the largest rebellion apart from the vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal the first time around, the first meaningful vote. So clearly a massive problem for the Prime Minister. And it raises questions about whether or not, if Omicron gets even more serious and he decides that they need to bring in tougher restrictions, closing down certain venues, restricting household mixing, whether he'll be able to get that through. He can probably rely on the opposition for that support, but that's not a good position for a Conservative Prime Minister to be in.
How serious is the rift between the Red Wall Conservatives, the Tories who won their seats for the first time 2 years ago, and the traditional Southern MPs? Is that fault line still pretty serious?
I don't think it's that serious. I think the issue is levelling up is still very nascent in its development. I think you can make it perfectly clear that levelling up the North and the Midlands doesn't mean levelling down the South. I just think that because levelling up hasn't been developed quick enough, there's still a bit of ambiguity, and some people in the South might feel as if it's something which might be a detriment to them. I don't think that's the case. Hopefully when we get the Levelling Up white paper, we'll be able to make more progress on that.
Well, I mean, sheesh, nascent in development. Levelling up is a slogan from 2 years ago. I mean, yes, I admit that it's, we've had this enormous health crisis in the meantime, but it still strikes me as, incredibly strange that it's an idea with no kind of, no research behind it, really.
You're not wrong. I think that there are now good people working on the agenda, Neil O'Brien, Michael Gove, obviously. And so I think that in the new year, we will start to see it really pick up. At least I hope so. But so far, yes, it has been, unfortunately, very slow progress.
Your think tank says it's in favour of liberal conservatism. What are the prospects for liberal conservatism at the moment? And are they improved by Boris Johnson's star fading?
I'm not sure about that. I think that one of our big focuses as a think tank, which we think is very important for modernising conservatism, is the focus on decarbonisation and net zero. And to be fair for the Prime Minister, he's been very good at that. And I think that the Conservatives have done a great job of really taking on that agenda. It's not really a political issue in the same way that it is in other countries, in the United States, in France, etc. So that's been a really key success, I think, for Conservatives, and something that we're very happy with as a think tank.
Okay. As we go into the recess, these next few weeks are going to end up perhaps being quite crucial in terms of the health crisis. Is there going to be any time, I suppose, for the Prime Minister to go away and have a think about this electoral defeat, or for Conservatives to go away and do that too? Or, are we simply going to be in the midst of a health crisis that won't give that much space? I suppose I'm asking, what do you anticipate in the next couple of weeks? How active are MPs going to be?
I think MPs can be very active. I mean, he essentially seems to have promised them in the 1922 committee that if he does need to bring in new restrictions, he will recall Parliament, and that will be very important. Whether or not he'd be able to pass those restrictions is another matter. I mean, he's got to think about it. He can't be overtaken by events. Prime ministers are meant to control and set events. They're not meant to be overtaken by them. That was the problem with Theresa May. She was completely swept away by the Brexit saga. And Boris Johnson can't let that happen to him over coronavirus, because he has all of these important ambitions he needs to deliver on. I mean, on Theresa May, I think it's worth pointing out that Theresa May was Prime Minister for 3 years. Boris Johnson so far has managed, I think, almost 2.5. It would be extraordinary if he somehow lasted less time than Theresa May, despite winning a majority of her losing hers. I don't think that will happen. I think he will survive this. But he does have to bear that in mind.
Bloomberg Westminster. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.